Now, from the studios of Into Tomorrow in Miami, this is ITTV.
Our next guest is with a nonprofit organization focused on understanding and addressing media's impact on child development. So if you're a parent or a grandparent or a child for that matter, this is very important. Our guest is the founder and president of Children and Screens, the Institute for Digital Media and Child Development, Dr. Pam Hurst-Della Pietra. Dr. Pam, welcome Into Tomorrow. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Dave. Thanks for the invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Long Island, New York.
Oh, Long Island. Very good. Well, glad to have you with us. And I mentioned in your introduction that all parents and grandparents especially need to pay attention to the kinds of important information that you impart. Tell me first a little bit about the Institute, the organization itself, and then we'll get into some of the details.
Sure. I founded Children and Screens, the Institute of Digital Media and Child Development, in 2013, and has since become one of the nation's leading conveners, curators of scientific information, and we on the subject of children and digital media. So we advance research on the topic, and we educate the public, as we're doing today, and we also advocate for sound public policy in this arena. So yeah, that's some of what we do. And since the pandemic began, we've been busier than ever.
Oh, I can imagine.
Trying to help parents through this really, challenging and difficult time. And so we're really glad that your viewers are here, and people can check out our tips and our webinars. We have just given, I think, our 30th webinar since the pandemic began.
Wow.
And happy to hear from anybody who has any questions at info@childrenandscreens.com.
Okay, terrific. Of course, keeping children safe, whether it be during a pandemic, but certainly all the time, yet still giving them room to grow. I know it's kind of one of your mission statements.
Yes, it's, with the advent of these devices, I think a lot of parenting has been, disrupted, both as parents are more involved with their screens as well as their children. And so, sometimes we have to really think about, the extent to which a parent has control over, what content and devices their children, have. And so sometimes, parents have relinquished some of this to, the kids to their own devices, so to speak.
Yeah. When is it that a parent can feel comfortable, if you will, kind of allowing their children, at what age, basically, I'm asking, to introduce devices into the child's life, if the child hasn't already managed to do so on their own?
Yeah, so I would say that it really does depend on the age, and it really depends on the child, the age, their unique characteristics, their developmental stage, and of course, the family's values. And so you could think about this in terms of like a car. You do everything you can, when the child's born, to keep the child very safe and secure. And you, for example, you would have a car seat when, you're bringing the baby back from the hospital, mm-hmm. and then, eventually booster seat, sitting in the back seat, and then the front seat, and then eventually driving the car, right? And it's really graduated in a graduated fashion, right? And to that extent, you really need to be able to give kids the rules of the road, starting from really a young age. And as the children get older, if you feel that, and you watch them, and you feel that they're handling these devices responsibly in the way that you care about, and that they have self-control, you might want to give them a little bit more leeway. But, I wouldn't necessarily give a child their own device I would keep it for as long as I could. And of course, for some kids, it is a rite of passage. But in terms of introducing the digital media, that's going to be up to each individual parent. And it could be showing a little one a show, an educational show at age 2. For some, it's 4. For some, it's 5. It really depends.
So it's not so much of giving them a device at 4 or 5 years old as it is being able to introduce them to a tablet or a phone to watch a show that they may be interested in. But I hear parents kind of screaming in my head saying, okay, but if my child's kind of average, nothing special, but they're hanging in there with other kids, at what age has the Institute even come up with saying, on average, at what age do most parents introduce a phone to them, or a tablet, or some sort of device that we can then talk, of course, momentarily about how much time they should spend on it, but at what point is it appropriate for a child to even have their own phone?
Right. Well, that, again, is also a personal issue. Some people believe that kids should wait until eighth grade, before being given a phone. There's a lot of different considerations, and in terms of safety, for example. So some parents want their child to be in contact with them, and so they would really want some kind of device. And you can have what's called a dumb phone if you want the child to be able to, be in contact with you. So not necessarily full control over the internet. So it really depends on what kind of controls you'd like to have set up on the devices, what the need is, as I said, what the developmental stage is, and what this child's peers are doing. So, for example, sometimes if all of the kids in a child's school has an iPhone, there's going to be a time when the parent needs to decide whether or not they will allow their child or their teen to have a phone as well. But it really has to do with, working with the co-parent and discussing, what is your values with regard to technology use, and also trying to model consistency, your values consistently in the home. So, for example, if the parents, value their kids, spending a lot of time, at the outdoors, let's say in an unplugged way, then maybe the parent should, try to model this behavior. If they would like the child not, to be sort of front and center when the parent is talking with them, maybe they also could put their devices down when they are speaking with the child, and maybe not walk in the front door talking on the phone, or, kind of trying to limit the parents' use of the devices to times when the little one, let's say, has gone to sleep, or something like that. Of course, we understand that a lot of parents are working it from home right now. Sure. But as I mentioned, or I alluded, the absolute minimum age would be 2, and the American Academy of Pediatrics sort of is consistent with that. Of course, there are always exceptions, Dave, with respect to communicating with grandma in Florida over Zoom or Skype or what have you, right? Or if you want to see a moving picture of a giraffe in Africa, something like that, where the parent is being very mindful.
Right. It sounds, when you were talking about if all the other kids in their class, for example, at whatever grade they're in, already have a phone. Doesn't have to be an iPhone, but a smartphone. Doesn't have to have a piece of fruit on it to be a good piece of electronics. Just want to point that out. But it sounds like peer pressure, but it's peer pressure for the parents. More so than the child. I mean, sure, they're thinking, yeah, maybe they're even wanting to say, well, I have one, but I have to keep it at home just to kind of cover themselves, if you will, because of that peer pressure. But how do you recommend that parents first approach the kids and say, all right, I think you're old enough, I think you can be responsible, but we're going to have some parental controls. How does a parent speak to their child about that and get that conversation going so that maybe you break it to them gently, but there's going to be rules?
Yes, I think that, what you're saying is very true. It's also how the kids communicate today. A lot of kids are, communicating via social media. So that's something that parents really also need to consider in terms of the pressure on them. But, in sort of talking about the conversation, it's, I think the first thing to do would be to, evaluate, what your challenges may be before you, even get into it. And, what are we actually going to be talking about today, for example? Are you going to talk about sort of what times of days the children you would like your kids to be on the screens? Absolutely. Or sometimes, when do I feel frustrated about when my kids are on the screen instead of being with me? Is it okay to play video games? And what time, what kind of video games, what video games are aligned with my values? Mm-hmm. And, as, what's worried me about, you could think about like what's worried me about my kids' digital media use over the last couple of weeks. So first is kind of, internalizing, looking inward about, what is it that bothers you as a parent? And, you can also think about, what do I know about various consequences of using digital media? We have lots of information on our website at www.childrenandscreens.com. Different questions are going to matter to different families. And, so this conversation would sort of lead into, hopefully, a family media plan. And, sort of cut and pasting the sections that really matter to a parent themselves or parents themselves. But it also, I think, should be done, especially with older children, really in a joint fashion so that they feel like they have agency. They feel like they're buying into whatever's been decided, and there's going to be a lot more they'll follow whatever they themselves have created and planned. But make sure that to start with that everyone's well rested, well fed, and calm, and then you can start having the conversation. And sort of, as I mentioned, you want to discuss with them, like, when are they going to use their devices for entertainment versus homework versus connection? So that's kind of how I divide these things up. And, how long are kids spending on various platforms, what they enjoy about it, what concerns you about it, what concerns them about it. In terms of healthy use of it, what do you feel is healthy use of the devices, and when do you feel like it gets unhealthy? Like, for example, if they have it in their bedrooms and they're waking up in the middle of the night to respond to a streak or to be gaming, and then their impulse control situations with respect. I know this is a long answer here, but there's, when is it that they're going to check their phones? So, for example, a lot of kids are checking their phones, it's between like 40 and 180 times a day.
Wow. And of course, parents probably are checking their phones, aside from work-related checking, almost as many times, if not more so, depending on how addicted we get to anti-social media. And I'm guessing this next question probably pertains to various age groups as well. But do you guys recommend parental monitoring apps? And if so, what features should a parent look for if they're monitoring their kids' activities?
So it really there are a lot of concerns to take into account with respect to the monitoring apps, and we don't necessarily recommend any in particular, but there's a lot out there. And for example, there's an expert in online safety whose name is Caroline Bunting, who talks about 4 specific qualities, and they are control, coverage, simplicity, and value. And so, in terms of these, with respect to the control, you want to specify, various limits for certain activities and certain websites, right?
True.
Rather than enforcing blanket cutoff times, and manage the devices that do not require, and apps that don't require internet access. And in terms of coverage, you also might want to think about, multi-device usage. So you can address that with some of the apps in terms of multi-platform. So it's not just blocking YouTube. It's blocking it's blocking things on kids have so many different devices depending on depending on the circumstances.
Right.
Of course, some kids have only, let's say one device, but, it's common in today's family life that, a child could have a laptop and a cell phone and a desktop, for example, maybe an iPad, right?
Yeah.
So you want to try to think about that. And then in terms of simplicity, coming up with sort of simple solutions instead of something that requires a lot of work on your part and a lot of work on your child's part. And then, the value of it. So if it means that your child's constantly coming to you and saying, I can't get onto my website for this or that, or if it's creating a lot of arguments with your children, maybe you have to go back and, have that family discussion again.
Sure.
Because we certainly don't want to create tension. We want to you want you to, alleviate that.
Right. And there's so much more that we want to get into, but we are way over time. So we'll just have to get you back again sometime soon. But in the meantime, I invite our audience, of course, to visit childrenandscreens.com. We'll get you there when you visit us at intotomorrow.com. Come and check out the video of the interview with Dr. Pam. And Dr. Pam Hurst-Della Pietra is the founder and president of Children and Screens, Institute of Digital Media and Child Development. Could you have made that any longer? But it's easy to get online. Childrenandscreens.com. You can remember that because it's very important. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's been a real pleasure.
Our pleasure as well. Again, childrenandscreens.com. Visit us at intotomorrow.com and we'll get you there. And you'll see what Dr. Pam and her team are up to, and very, very good information on a regular basis, certainly for parents and grandparents and the kids themselves. Check it out. We're back with more as Into Tomorrow continues. I'm Dave Graveline, right here on the Advanced Media Network.